She was just 15, a black teenager who had spent weeks under the burning sun, polishing car windows at traffic lights for a few crumpled dollars. On her best day, she saved enough to dream of buying a sandwich, maybe even a bus ride home. But that small plan was shattered when she saw a lost child in an expensive dress, trembling and crying in the middle of a crowded square, while people walked by. What happened next would test not just her hunger but her heart. Because in that moment, with only $7 to her name, she made a choice that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have imagined. Why would a millionaire's helicopter one day land at her door, and what secret test did she unknowingly pass? Sofia Martinez was 15, a black teenager who lived in a small, weathered apartment on the edge of the city with her grandmother, Isabel Cruz. The walls of their home were thin, and the air often heavy with the scent of boiled beans and worn fabric, but it was filled with quiet love and resilience. Isabel, a woman whose hands bore the story of decades of scrubbing floors and cleaning offices, had always taught Sofia the importance of dignity and perseverance. Every night after work, Isabel would return exhausted, her uniform stained and torn, yet she never complained. Her determination to provide for her granddaughter was silent but fierce. Sofia, too young for a real job, had found her own way to contribute. Every afternoon, she made her way to the traffic lights near Riverside Square, an area buzzing with the constant rhythm of city life. The honking of impatient drivers, the chatter of street vendors, and the occasional notes of a saxophone drifting from a corner. She carried an old rag in one hand and a worn-out bottle of glass cleaner in the other, polishing car windows in the hope that someone would spare a dollar or two. Most days yielded barely enough to cover a bus ride home. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at her stomach and reminding her of everything she lacked. Yet Sofia had learned to stretch every penny she earned, counting coins under the dim light of their kitchen while her grandmother dozed in her chair. On her best day, she had managed to save $7, a modest sum that felt like treasure. To Sofia, those $7 were not just money. They were possibility, a small window into a life slightly less burdened by want. That afternoon, Sofia made her way toward a food cart that smelled of grilled meat and fresh bread. The square was crowded, full of people rushing past without a glance at the girl with worn-out shoes and a determined expression. Among the chaos, something unusual caught her eye. A small, trembling figure standing alone in the middle of the square. It was a young girl, blonde and no older than 9, wearing an immaculate blue dress that seemed impossibly out of place in this part of the city. She was crying quietly, her small hands clutching at her dress, her lips trembling as tears ran down her cheeks. People walked past as if she were invisible. Sofia hesitated, glancing at the $7 bill tucked in her pocket. It had taken weeks to save. Hunger pressed against her ribs like a physical weight. Yet as she watched the child, something inside her shifted. She could feel the raw fear emanating from the girl, a helplessness she knew too well. Years ago, Sofia had watched her own family crumble under circumstances they could not control. A father lost to illness, a mother gone before she could hold her hand through the dark. She remembered the panic, the loneliness, the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would come to help. Stepping closer, Sofia reached out, offering a hand of comfort. In that instant, class, wealth, age, and background meant nothing. She was just a teenager confronted with a choice: tend to her own hunger or offer what little she had to a stranger in need. The square hummed around them, oblivious to the quiet moral decision unfolding in the midst of its chaos. As she made her choice, the world did not pause, but a pair of observant eyes were watching. 2 men in dark business suits stood at a distance, noting her every movement. Sofia had no idea that this lost child was connected to a world far removed from her own, a world of wealth, influence, and opportunity. To her, it was simply an act of compassion. Yet in that moment, she stepped unknowingly into a story that would stretch far beyond the traffic lights, beyond Riverside Square, and beyond anything she had ever imagined for herself. Back at home, Isabel had often told Sophia that kindness was invisible to the world until the right moment. Sometimes angels come disguised, she would say, her voice calm and knowing, to test us, to see what we are made of. Sophia had never fully understood what her grandmother meant. But that day, standing at a crossroads between self-interest and empathy, she began to sense the truth behind those words. One choice, simple, small, human, would set the stage for a journey that no coin, no meal, and no ordinary day could have predicted. The setup was simple. One girl with barely anything, another child crying alone, and a city too busy to notice. But for Sophia, this was the moment where her character, her courage, and her compassion would be tested in ways that would change her life forever. And somewhere unseen, the threads of fate were already beginning to weave a future that would demand more from her than she had ever given before. Sophia's decision to give her sandwich to the lost child had been small in the moment, but its impact rippled far beyond what she could see. Elizabeth Harrington, the girl's mother, had arrived minutes later, relief flooding her expression as she swept her daughter into her arms. Sophia felt the warmth of gratitude, but the moment passed quickly. She was still standing in the crowded square, unnoticed by the rest of the world. Yet two men in tailored suits lingered nearby, their eyes fixed on her. Something was calculating in their gaze, as though they were measuring the weight of her choices, the depth of her character. Sophia did not know it yet, but this act of simple kindness had marked her. A few days later, a sleek envelope arrived at her apartment. Sophia's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing an invitation to meet Elizabeth Harrington at the Harrington Health Foundation. The foundation's office was unlike anything Sophia had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city skyline, and polished marble floors gleamed under bright lights. The receptionist, immaculate in her uniform, barely looked up as she led Sophia to a conference room. The moment the door closed behind her, the weight of expectation hit her. This world was foreign and intimidating, yet there was a quiet anticipation in the air, as if the room itself was waiting to see whether she belonged. Elizabeth explained the purpose of the Foundation's program. It was not just financial support, but a leadership track for students of exceptional character. Sophia was offered 3 internships, one at a public hospital, another at a rural health post, and a third at a drug rehabilitation center. She would be given $2,500 to cover expenses, but the schedule was grueling. 16 hours of work every week after school. Sophia's excitement was tempered by apprehension. The thought of navigating these unfamiliar worlds, of proving herself in spaces where she had never been, was daunting. Yet something inside her whispered that this was a chance she could not ignore. Her first internship took her to a bustling public hospital. From the moment she stepped in, the atmosphere was unforgiving. Nurses and staff glanced at her skeptically, questioning why a 15-year-old was there at all. Whispers followed her through the halls. Does she really belong here? How much can a kid know about this? Sophia ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on the patients. Every task, from delivering charts to assisting nurses, carried pressure. But she learned quickly, her instincts honed by years of responsibility at home, by the need to survive and adapt. The second internship at a rural health post brought its own challenges. Resources were scarce, and the staff were overworked. Sophia witnessed firsthand the disparities in healthcare. Patients who could not afford basic treatments, children whose families had nowhere to turn. The injustice of it burned inside her, but she refused to falter. She listened, comforted, and learned, understanding that every small action mattered. Each day, she returned home exhausted but more determined, carrying stories of pain, resilience, and humanity back to her grandmother. The most difficult test came at the drug rehabilitation center. Calvin, a young man with a sharp tongue and an impatient demeanor, made it clear he did not believe a 15-year-old could understand the pain of addiction. "You're just a kid," he sneered. "What do you know about struggle?" Sophia met his gaze calmly. She thought of her father, who had died of an overdose, and her mother, who had passed from untreated cancer because they could not afford care. Her voice steady, her heart open, she explained this truth, not as accusation but as lived reality. The room fell silent. Slowly, respect replaced skepticism. Patients began to listen, share, and trust her. In that moment, Sophia realized that compassion often carried more weight than authority. Even with these small victories, challenges mounted. At the public hospital, she faced the most terrifying scenario yet. A 6-year-old accident victim arrived with no doctor immediately available. Chaos reigned as nurses scrambled for solutions. Sophia, guided by instinct, helped stabilize the child, applying pressure to wounds and comforting the frightened little one, until Dr. Moreno, a senior physician who had once treated her grandmother, arrived. The staff watched in disbelief. A 15-year-old had kept a child alive under extreme pressure. Sophia felt the adrenaline fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake, but also a profound sense of purpose. Outside these moments of crisis, the weight of being young, black, and underestimated pressed on her. She noticed the subtle ways people treated her differently. Condescending glances, whispered assumptions, and moments when her efforts were minimized or ignored. Each interaction carried a sting, a reminder of the barriers her skin color placed in front of her, even in spaces meant to nurture growth. Yet Sophia refused to let the prejudice define her. She allowed herself to feel anger and frustration, but she channeled it into determination. With each passing week, the stakes rose. Supervisors began to notice her unwavering resilience, but they also tested her patience and boundaries. Tasks grew more complex. Hours lengthened. Mistakes became opportunities for judgment. She was pushed to her limits, physically and emotionally, and often left questioning whether she could continue. But every time she helped a patient breathe easier, comforted a frightened child, or offered reassurance to a family in despair, she reaffirmed her belief that the work mattered. That small act of kindness in Riverside Square had sparked something far greater than a sandwich. It had ignited a fire of purpose that no obstacle could extinguish. By the end of the first month, Sophia had begun to understand the invisible rules of power and prejudice, and she had learned to navigate them with humility and courage. Every whispered doubt, every skeptical glance, was a reminder that the world was not always fair. Yet every life she touched became a testament to her determination to rise above systemic injustice. She was no longer the girl at the traffic lights. She was becoming someone capable of holding light in dark spaces. And yet, for all she had accomplished, the greatest test was still to come. Because even as Sophia learned, adapted, and fought to make a difference, the world outside continued to spin, unaware that a girl's act of compassion in Riverside Square had set a course for something extraordinary. How would the universe reward kindness in a world so quick to overlook it? And what challenges would Sophia face next as she stepped closer to a life that could change everything? Not just for her, but for those who had been left behind. Weeks of relentless work, skepticism, and judgment had brought Sophia to a breaking point. She had faced whispers that doubted her worth, smirks that dismissed her intelligence, and challenges that no teenager should endure. But nothing compared to the day the public hospital was thrown into chaos. The emergency room was a cacophony of cries, alarms, and hurried footsteps. Nurses shouted over one another, patients wailed in fear, and the fluorescent lights cast a harsh, unforgiving glare across the linoleum floors. It began when a 6-year-old boy was rushed in after a severe accident. Blood stained his shirt, his breathing was shallow, and the nearest doctor was occupied with another critical case. Panic surged through the room. Nurses barked instructions at each other, but no one could immediately attend to the child. In that moment, Sophia felt a cold fear grip her chest. She could hear the judgmental murmurs. "She's too young to handle this. What can a teenager do?" Every doubt the staff had ever expressed about her swirled in the air like smoke, threatening to suffocate her confidence. Sophia's hands shook as she stepped forward. She ignored the whispers and the incredulous stares. Her training, intuition, and sheer willpower guided her. She stabilized the boy's injuries, adjusted his position, applied pressure where needed, and whispered calming words, trying to mask the fear racing through her own mind. She could feel the judgment in the room, sharp as a blade, but she refused to yield. Every second mattered, every motion could mean life or death. Minutes stretched like hours. Nurses checked and rechecked her actions, some with disbelief, others with tentative hope. Dr. Moreno, a seasoned physician who had once treated her grandmother, rushed in just as Sophia was about to lose control. He took in the scene. The boy stabilized, breathing improving, a teenager standing resolute amid chaos, and paused. His eyes widened, a mixture of astonishment and silent acknowledgement. The staff who had doubted her now regarded her with something bordering on awe. Sophia didn't notice the admiration. She was consumed by the immediacy of saving a life, by the raw intensity of responsibility. The ordeal left her drained, shaking, and deeply aware of how fragile life could be. Yet, it was also the first moment she truly grasped her own strength. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and even ridiculed, but she had faced every ounce of doubt and emerged capable. And for the first time, she realized that her choices, the ones no one else seemed to notice, had power beyond her imagination. Even after the emergency passed, the hospital staff could not stop talking about her courage. Some apologized quietly for underestimating her, while others simply stared, stunned by what they had witnessed. Sophia's heart swelled with a quiet pride, but she also felt the weight of everything she had endured. The relentless scrutiny, the microaggressions, the unspoken prejudices. They had all culminated in this intense, life-altering moment. It was proof of her resilience, but also a reminder of how much she had to fight, simply to be recognized as capable. At the rehabilitation center, Sophia faced another trial. Calvin, the young counselor who had mocked her early on, continued to challenge her, questioning her ability to understand pain and addiction. But Sophia now carried the knowledge of her own strength, honed in the hospital and through every act of compassion she had offered. She spoke calmly, firmly, and with the weight of lived experience. She told the patients about her father, lost to an overdose, and her mother, who died because they couldn't afford care. The room, once filled with skepticism, fell silent. Slowly, heads nodded. Patients who had doubted her began to listen, seeking guidance and support. She had earned not just respect, but influence. The tipping point, however, came in an unexpected form. One afternoon, Sophia was called back to the foundation office. The supervisors who had been observing her throughout the internships praised her resilience and character. They spoke of potential, opportunity, and a future that could change everything. Not just for her, but for the community she came from. And then came the offer. Not just a scholarship, not just placement on an accelerated track with mentors from world-class universities, but the promise of a clinic to be built in her neighborhood, with her as the future director. Sophia's mind raced. She remembered the traffic lights, the coins saved painstakingly over weeks, the sandwich she had given to a lost girl. She thought of her grandmother's worn hands, her gentle voice, and the small apartment that had felt so confining yet so full of love. Could this really be happening? Could one act of kindness, one choice made in a crowded square, ripple out to create something so monumental? Her heart pounded as she realized the magnitude of it. All the doubt, all the prejudice, all the quiet moments of being overlooked, they had led her here. And yet, there was still a final challenge. Could she rise to the expectations placed upon her? Could she carry the responsibility of a future far larger than herself? And could she ensure she never lost touch with the roots that had shaped her character? As Sophia left the foundation that day, her mind was a storm of hope, fear, and determination. She knew the journey ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. The act of giving her last meal to a frightened little girl had opened a door to a world of opportunity, but the path was only beginning. Somewhere beyond the city skyline, someone else was watching, waiting to see if this young girl could take her chance and turn compassion into something extraordinary. The question lingered in the air, heavy with anticipation. Could a single act of kindness really change the course of a life, and even the lives of countless others? Sophia's answer was about to unfold, and the world would never be the same. Years passed, and Sophia Martinez had transformed from a quiet, determined teenager into a young woman whose name carried weight far beyond her neighborhood. The small act of kindness in Riverside Square, the moment she gave her last sandwich to a trembling little girl, had grown into a life defined by purpose, resilience, and change. Elizabeth Harrington's initial recognition of her character had opened doors Sophia could scarcely have imagined, but it was Sophia's unwavering commitment to compassion and excellence that turned opportunity into lasting impact. 3 years later, a sleek black helicopter landed near her apartment building, drawing the attention of curious neighbors. It was an extraordinary sight in a part of the city rarely touched by wealth or luxury. Elizabeth Harrington stepped out, carrying a silver briefcase, her expression calm but full of significance. Inside were the keys to a fully built community clinic, named in honor of Isabel Cruz, Sophia's grandmother, a woman whose quiet strength had nurtured Sophia through years of struggle. Alongside the keys were documents detailing a full scholarship to Oxford University, a series of international medical internships, and a bank account to support her family. For Sophia, it was the culmination of a journey that had begun with a simple choice: to prioritize someone else's need above her own. The Isabel Cruz Community Clinic represented more than a building or a name. It was a symbol of what compassion could achieve. Sophia now oversaw 3 clinics providing free care to underserved communities, each staffed with professionals trained to value character and humanity over profit. Calvin, once a skeptic who mocked her youth and questioned her understanding of suffering, now worked as a counselor at her rehabilitation center, mentoring patients alongside her. The very people who had doubted her, underestimated her, or ignored her potential had become witnesses to the impact of her perseverance and empathy. Yet beyond the accolades, scholarships, and clinics, Sophia carried the lessons of her early life wherever she went. She remembered standing at traffic lights with coins clenched in her fist, hungry and unseen, learning resilience by necessity. She remembered her grandmother's gentle wisdom, teaching her that true wealth was measured in kindness and integrity, not money or titles. And she remembered the little girl in the blue dress, whose fear and vulnerability had called forth the courage Sophia didn't know she possessed. That memory remained her compass, a reminder that small, selfless acts can ripple into extraordinary change. The story of Sophia Martinez is not just about personal triumph. It is about the invisible struggles faced by countless young people in marginalized communities. It is about a society that is quick to overlook talent, character, and courage when packaged in the wrong skin tone or the wrong zip code. It is a story of systemic barriers, of microaggressions and whispered doubts, and of how perseverance and moral courage can push through them. When a community, a foundation, or even a single individual chooses to recognize character over prejudice, the results can be transformative. In Riverside Square, a simple plaque now reads, "Small choices, lasting change." Passers-by rarely notice its subtle elegance, yet it tells the story of a young black girl who refused to let hunger, fear, or invisibility define her. It tells the story of a world that often moves too fast to see the humanity of those it marginalizes. And it reminds every viewer that moments of kindness, however small, have the potential to shift destinies. Sophia's journey continues, not just in the halls of universities or clinics, but in every life she touches. Her story asks us to consider a fundamental question. What could happen if, instead of ignoring injustice, we chose to act with empathy, even when it requires sacrifice? How many lives might be transformed if society recognized character before wealth or status? The helicopter and the scholarships were remarkable, but they were never the true miracle. The true miracle was the courage to act in the face of discomfort, the willingness to put another's need before one's own, and the refusal to let prejudice define her worth. Sophia proved that compassion is a force capable of reshaping the world, that systemic barriers can be challenged not just by institutions but by individuals with courage and conscience. Today, viewers, when you reflect on Sophia's story, consider your own small choices. Every act of empathy matters, every voice against injustice counts, and every moment of courage can ripple far beyond what you imagine. Will you wait to be seen, or will you choose to act? Will you let prejudice and indifference define who matters, or will you create change with the simplest acts of kindness? Because in a world that often moves too fast to notice, it is the brave, compassionate, and determined who illuminate the path. Sophia Martinez's story proves that when you choose empathy over self-interest, generosity over fear, and action over indifference, the world can and does respond. If Sophia Martinez's story touched you, think about the power of a single act of kindness. One small choice changed her life and the lives of countless others around her. It's a powerful reminder that courage, empathy, and compassion can ripple far beyond what we imagine. If this story inspired you, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real, emotional stories that highlight resilience, injustice, and hope. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if faced with a moment like Sophia's?